Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Donald and Michelle here, and welcome back to part two of the video teleseminar on cover letters.
So when creating a cover letter, what are your thoughts about using graphics or pictures on cover letters and resume? I do see that a lot.
Yeah, I mean that's something new. You know what? Something new. Graphics on not only the cover letter but the resume too. Relatively new. This used to be verboten. You were not allowed to do this. But you know what? These tools are available. We've all got them. If it's done well, you can do it. But it's got to be done. This is for graphics. Let's say, and I mean graphics on the cover letter or the resume. You can put a graphic on the cover letter if it's well done, number one, and if it advances the story. In other words, what people do, and this is not good, people say, I'm going to add some graphics and make it interesting. And then let's say you use company logos of all the companies you've worked for, IBM, SAP, Microsoft, right? Marquee names. You put their logos on your resume or your cover letter. That is really not helpful. You know, that's clutter. And it doesn't help you to, maybe helps advertise them. I don't know. What are we doing? Their annual report or something? No good. But, for example, you might have, I'll tell you something. I won an award for a sales resume a year or two ago. And the person was from Japan, and he had a kind of a complicated story. If you can believe this, he actually orchestrated a new advertising medium in New York City. He was in Hong Kong at the time. He got the idea to put a gigantic billboard display at the top of One Times Square. This is for the year 2000, right? The Y2K. Because his reasoning was there would be 1 billion people watching the ball go down at Times Square, and that would be the world's most ingenious place to advertise his client. And, you know, it was an amazing story, and he actually did it. He had no contacts in New York. He didn't know anything. But he just drove this thing. It was an amazing story. But at the end, you know, it was so complicated, convoluted, and I said, you know what? You really can't describe what's going on unless you show a picture of the building with that giant sign on it on New Year's. And we did that, you know, and it all worked. And it was very, very effective. But, I mean, that's where a graphic can advance a story, where it's, you know, it's too much to describe in words, but it's real clear in a second if you can show a picture of what you. And that's the same for a resume or a cover letter. I put graphics on cover letters to introduce some humor. This is very risky, but if it's done well, you can get away with, not only get away with it, you can stand out. I've done this. But it's like playing with nitroglycerin. A little goes a long way, and you've got to be very careful what you're doing. I'll tell you another one, however. You know what? We had a competition here, these Tory Awards for cover letters. I did something this year for that. I sent in I submitted a sample cover letter, right? And it was in total plain text, like one of these emails. No graphics, no format, not just plain old text. Maybe it'll win an award. I was nominated, but it had a very good story. It was about a story of somebody who came from another country and who learned the language and rose to the top. I think it was well done. It was a good story, and the writing, this thing got nominated for award. It did not have a single bit of formatting. It was just plain text. So you can get fancy, and I do see more of it, more graphics on the resumes and the letters. If it's done well, it's good. But you can also be just as effective with a very good story in plain old text with no formatting at all.
So I guess you really have to know your audience.
Sure. And the audience and the particular situation. There really is no law, and it's very hard for me sometimes. People will see something that I have done, maybe in a book or an award, and they'll say, wow, I love that resume that you did for John Smith. I want one just like his. I said, whoa. I said, you don't. I did that for him. That's his career. You don't. You can't. I can't squeeze. Shoehorn your career, and this was done for another person, and they get very, a little bit disappointed. Someone said, I want a graphic on there, but I said, you don't need it, and I don't know. I don't know how to make it like where it advances your story. So. It's very situational. Depends on the person and, of course, the audience and all that.
Okay. So what about social media replacements for traditional resume and cover letter? LinkedIn?
Well, they're out there, too. They're out there. I mean,
now, do you consider them replacements, or how do you see them?
I'll tell you what. Look, I'll tell you what. I mean, for example, there's a great book. It was written by Susan Whitcomb and Deb Dibb and Shanley. And it was all about Twitter cover letters, using Twitter in job search, Twitter resume, Twitter cover letters, Twitter thank you notes. You can certainly do it. I think that will work if you, for example, are in the social media business. You know what I mean? Maybe you're in maybe you're in a marketing analyst kind of position for some new edge, leading edge social media kind of company. You might want to communicate using all those forms, all those. You might communicate through Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, right? And not so much as send an email. Certainly doable. I don't think that works if you're a CFO. If you're in accounting, if you're probably in any kind of engineering, it's too cumbersome. But as Marshall McLuhan wrote that famous book, "The Medium is the Message," if you're in social media, then probably you ought to be communicating with social media, right? But not for everybody else. I think that social media is very important for gathering intelligence, extending a network, doing all kinds of things. But I would not rely on that if you're in some industry like electrical engineering. I would not communicate that way because people aren't going.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do see that on LinkedIn, a lot of people will, let's say, put a link to their resume or do a web-based resume. Where do you think the cover letter fits in? Is it appropriate to have some kind of a cover letter that you can link to, or is that something you can actually address in your LinkedIn
You know what?
profile?
I don't think. It's a little different. I think that the resume and LinkedIn are certainly converging. They're not the same, and I don't think that the resume is going to be replaced by LinkedIn because whether people realize it or not, plain old resume, if it's well done, it's much faster than any social media. But like plain old text, if it's done well, it's well edited, faster than Facebook, faster than LinkedIn. So for vetting large numbers of people, resume, CV is always going to be around, I think. But the resume and the LinkedIn, for example, have converged. So you say, well, what happened to the cover letter? I think on LinkedIn, I think the cover letter is the summary. You know that? Whereas unlike a resume, the summary section of LinkedIn, now this is new territory, you can write in the first person. You have all kinds of freedom to express yourself in that summary on LinkedIn. And you can cover a lot of bases. Maybe not for everybody. Maybe that would just require an email for some very special information going to a company. But you can present yourself the way you would in, for example, an old-style cover letter, shorter, but you can do that in the summary if it's well done. I think people miss that because you can. I mean, look, first person is more powerful than what we usually have in the summary, for example, of a resume. You can tell a story. You can add in if you have an interesting personal story, or even if it's not so interesting, maybe a writer can make it interesting. That is the place, I believe, the summary of the LinkedIn. So you can't do that on a resume. That's where I think it goes.
I think we need to just go a little bit deeper with that for our listeners. I'm not sure that people actually have a good understanding of the difference between a resume and a LinkedIn profile, and I don't like to use the word rules, but why a LinkedIn profile is actually written in the first person and where a resume is not.
It's just tradition. I am not sure about. I've wondered about that. Look, in other areas of the world, people use the first person and tell their kind of personal narrative right on the resume. You certainly see that in Australia. You see it in all other countries. In North America, probably England, UK, we don't do that. We don't really use the third person. It's not even good. That's like more for like corporate bio. We use we don't use personal pronouns. I don't know why, but we don't. And it looks weird if you do, frankly, unless you got a good reason. I've done it. I've used personal pronouns on resumes because they were well done. I just did one I also submitted to a competition because sometimes they just work better. But generally, no. You don't put I, me, we, all that stuff. No, not on a resume. The problem is it's weaker. So I have to write without any personal pronouns. There's no subject to these sentences, right? We write in fragments. The subject is implied. I can't say I or we. You know, that is the rule, frankly. That is 90% of the time. That's what you do. But in LinkedIn, I'm not bound by that rule, and I don't know why. It's just, historic. Resumes are written in a certain style. That's all. Resumes are written, CVs in a certain style. And LinkedIn is very undefined right now. And you see all kinds of things, all kinds of ways. Some of it depends. If it's well done, it works. And I don't care if it's not well done. I don't have any rational explanation of why they're different. However, I will say this. The LinkedIn profile is, I think it will be the primary thing down the road. We've talked for a long time about social media resumes and video resumes and all this. And for the last 10 years, every year there's some new flavor of the week, some flavor of the year, right? This is going to be the new resume. Hasn't really happened. However, LinkedIn made this change in the fall of 2012, right? It is very easy to add multimedia onto LinkedIn now. So you can see it, the resume kind of morphing almost into a website. I mean, I use LinkedIn as my primary website now because I can hang all kinds of stuff on there. People will be doing that, and they've already started, and so the LinkedIn will be a different creature. I don't know exactly how, but you'll be posting all kinds of projects and PowerPoint, videos. Resume can't do that.
Now, if you have a well-developed LinkedIn profile, you can actually use that content as you're creating a cover letter.
Yes, you could. If it's well done, you could use that, for example, a summary. Summary, like there are some people who have such interesting stories that motivates them as to what they do that it really would be great for cover letter. Other people refuse to divulge anything personal. You know what I'm saying? It's like they've had their personalities extracted, physically or eliminated physically and on paper. I'm sorry. Some people I can't make them interesting. They won't cooperate. They talk like a computer. And in those cases, I say let's we'll do something else here for the summary, a little more traditional. But it really. It is so personal and so individual. I can't make up a case, but I tell you this: if you have a good story, or you have some information that I can make into a good story, yeah, that goes in the summary, and it could be the intro to a cover letter. Could be. The difficulty is when you're actually writing a cover letter. It's very important very important to put the spotlight on the receiver. In other words, the interviewer, the company that you're writing to, the person, whoever you're writing to. You put the spotlight on them. You put the spotlight on what you can do for them, and it's all about them. And you come into the picture further down in the letter. It is a big mistake, in my opinion, and this is direct marketing. You don't start off writing about yourself. You start, intro. Intro is all about you. You know, I was researching, company X, your company, and I noticed this really impressed me, and I think I might be a good fit for whatever. But you always start it with the spotlight on the company, and then what you can do to contribute a little bit. This is what I mean about customization or personalization of the cover letter. If you can. Sometimes you don't even know what the company is. You can't do it. But throughout, the emphasis is on the spotlight is on the company. Now on LinkedIn, there is no company. It's you. You're in the spotlight. Right. And in that case, you can still talk about what you would do for past employers and potential employers, but you can also start off and talk about what's motivated. You might have come over in the United States early on, had some amazing experience and success, but obviously you see how personal. Cover letters are tough because there really are no guidelines until you know the person in the story. Do you know what I mean? It is so right. Personally, but that is a rule though about cover letter. You put the spotlight on company, and like for example, when I see a cover letter that starts with I say this is no good. You started with I. That's my little rule. I got to get them in there first, and then you come in. That's I would say 80% of the cover letters I see start that way. I am.
Give an example of how you can immediately grab an employer's attention on a cover letter that's more employer-centric.
Well, it takes a little bit of research. Is it worth doing that? If you're really interested, yeah, you start off on Google, look for news about the company. And by the way, this could be the news you might find may be irrelevant in a way. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
I noticed that, Google introduced something X, Y, or Z, and I find that very intriguing. Maybe that's not very important to them, even though it's in the news. However, it shows that you've researched the company. You don't have ESP. You can't guess exactly, but you want to show that you researched the company. So you would go on Google, you go on their website. You could even go beyond, you could go, if it's like anything financial, you could look on the Wall Street Journal and see what objective discussion, is going on about the company. It would show that you're very informed. And you can do this in the span of 2 lines. So I saw this comment in the Wall Street Journal here, and that got my attention because X, Y, and Z. I did this in business school. And that shows that, that comment might be a little bit off the wall. It's not that whatever you're talking about is not a priority, but it shows that, you're doing a little bit of research and that you're thinking and that you're approaching them directly and not some form letter.
Outside of the cover letter, which we're saying is somewhat dead, the traditional cover letter.
Yeah.
What else do you think might be on its way out? How about after interview letters or thank you notes?
Well, listen, by the way, this thank you letters are always in style. You know that? But it's the same deal I said with the letter. If you can find an address and send a little thank you note in the regular mail, that has a huge impact. Everybody says, oh yes, I've heard about that. I've heard about people who do that. I said, you do it? Well, no. Nobody does it. And few people do it. If you send a handwritten thank you for the interview, and by the way, that's all it has to be. You could also send an email with more specific stuff that you're going to follow up on. But just sending that little thank you note, people notice. That's not necessarily it's going to, they're going to hire you based on that, but they'll notice it. They won't forget it because it's rarely done and it's very classy. Likewise, I don't want to, how would I say? I'm going to plug a book. There's a book called Job Search Letters for Dummies. You know that?
Yeah.
This book used to be called Cover Letters for Dummies. That's what it was called. And this latest edition, I want to plug it because I'm in it. I have 4 pages in it. But Job Search Letters for Dummies, they don't call them cover letters in this book now because there are so many other forms that they're into. In other words, if you look at Job Search Letters for Dummies, it just came out in July, they talk about, all right, well, you talk about the HTML, you talk about the e-letter, the e-note, you have proposal letters, you have these hybrid things. It's kind of a proposal and a letter and a resume all in one. You have something that I got some attention on. It's called a bio flyer. It's kind of a hybrid of a bio, and you could put a letter in front of it or behind it. All kinds of new forms and new social media in here, too. There's a whole book. And a traditional cover letter is in here, too. It's not, it's, as I said, it's not dead. It's just on life support. It's not going to, there's just too many other things going on, and there's just so much competition for time and people's attention. The traditional cover letter is a little bit pro forma and a little, and sometimes that's okay as long as the resume gets in the right hands.
You've been able to provide a lot of really useful information on this topic. So,
hey, by the way, I'll tell you what else. Anybody listening on this teleseminar, it's something I'll do complimentary. Send me a copy of your current resume, and I'll evaluate it. Give you a quick evaluation. I'll tell you if it passed my test.
Yeah, you're pretty tough to pass.
You know what? It's all, you know what? You can always make these things better. I try not to be too critical. I believe that it depends on how important the opportunity is. Then the resume has to be better and better. But it doesn't have to be, look, I'll tell you the truth. You know what? If you're sending this resume with the cover letter to people who know you, people who like you, you're already introduced or your network somehow, resume can be awful. I hate to say that. The purpose of the resume is to get an interview. Your resume may not be very good at all, but if you're sending it to people who already know about you, you'll get an interview because your reputation trumps all of this. Where it comes into play is where you approach people who don't know you. You're in a new industry maybe, or you're approaching people that are outside of your network. People who don't know you and how what you've accomplished. In that case, all they have is the little cover note and, more importantly, the resume. And they'll make a decision on that in about 5 or 6 seconds on whether or not they want to engage you any further on the phone or for an interview. That's where I come in. But you always have to see where is this resume going? Is this going to the cold, cruel world? Or is it going to people who already know a little bit about you? Very different scenarios. Very different.
Okay. Thank you so much for participating in the National Career Summit. Again, you really were able to give us a lot of useful information. Do you have any other particular tips? I know that you've won a lot of awards for resume writing, cover letters, social media profiles. Any award-winning tips that you can offer to finish up our call?
I guess the best tip, I'm known for the resumes and that part of it, the cover letter, whatever. But best thing you can do in addition to that is stay very active. You know why? Because even if you have the best cover letter and resume in the world, if you find yourself in a position where you want to send it to people who matter, you really need to. It's really helpful to have a good network in place because people will help you get it into the right hands.
Thank you so much for participating.
Oh, you're very welcome. My pleasure.